Hey, with your evening story channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it. Hello, Kevin. I invite you to listen to a new author's story on my channel, The Story of the Box. David had little interest in money or power. If at first he already had an abundance of the latter, he was indifferent to the latter. David did not get involved in politics and did not PR at the expense of charity. And with his abilities, he could have become mayor of the city. You shouldn't be seizing this moment. People love you, I'm kidding. You built 2 schools, a shelter for homeless animals, and a center for rehabilitation of people in difficult life situations. You gave a tiny little girl a half-minute interview and then you were gone. Well, stupid by God, never stopped repeating the wife Adriana. In response, David only waved his hands and referred to the eternal business and dislike of self-promotion. Well, I've repaired something in the city. Helped as much as I could. I'm not an icon to pray to. I'm good with what I got. I love the sky at times like this. Adriana was just losing her temper. I'm sick of your sky and flying. You're like an obsessive. You don't want to spend time with your wife. You're just flying around. David shook his head and thought of something else. How do you explain to this woman the fact that his father was a pilot and from an early age he lived the romance of the sky? Of course, David never became a pilot, so he used the services of qualified specialists in flying. On weekends, when the weather was quiet and windless, the young businessman would take his miniature helicopter to the forest, where he could watch the curves of the river from a bird's eye view, migrate his animals, or simply enjoy the illusion of freedom. His light civilian helicopter flew almost silently and caused little discomfort to the residents of the surrounding villages. Some were so accustomed to David's flights that when they saw a blue bird in the sky, they waved at him. During such air trips, David always took binoculars with him, the powerful lenses of which allowed him to see everything happening on the ground in the smallest detail. Sometimes he even managed to get a couple of pictures on his camera to admire even on left blue evenings by the brightly burning fireplace. You're sick, David, and I've been telling you that for a long time. Only a madman could spend so much time in the sky, Adriana said in his heart. Well, if I'm crazy, then you could use some perspective. Believe me, you will easily see in the reflection of the mirror blonde, obsessed with shopping in the beauty salon and thoughts about what shoes to match with the next handbag. David objected. As a rule, this phrase was enough for Adriana to go to the other room of the offender, pressing her lips together. The couple had no children, and to a large extent their absence was explained by the position of Adriana herself, who wanted to live for herself and only then to know the joy of motherhood. It is difficult to say at the expense of what their marriage existed. Most likely, Adriana was favorable to David, who disappeared day and night at work and did not put forward in the spouse any special requirements. Although in David's life there was a true love, which left in his heart the most pleasant memories. Then, he was just beginning to take the first steps in business, and did not even suspect what heights he would achieve in the next 8 years. Not a day went by that David did not remember Betty, who put an unhealing wound in his heart. Their breakup had been stupid, and by and large, both of them were to blame. David had just given Betty a ring. No, not an engagement ring, just a keepsake. It was engraved on the back with the initials of their names, intertwined, and the thing itself wasn't cheap. But what to think about that now? David sighed and, taking his smartphone from the table, called the pilot of his private helicopter. James, you're ready to take off. The weather is good today, so I think I'll be able to get some good shots. Some of his co-workers, frankly, mocked David. Why would you fly a helicopter yourself when you can use a camera fight? And why drive for hours in the air and burn expensive fuel? But the young businessman knew that what he really needed was the very sensation of flying that his late father had been telling him about since childhood. The weather was perfect. The small private helicopter took off without any problems. Today, David intended to make a long refueling flight to a remote part of the forest where there was a good view of the whole area. "You should learn to fly yourself," David remarked to the pilot in the air. "No, I can't. I've tried. After all, my father died in a snowstorm on a rig and flew and crashed. As soon as I take the steering wheel in my hands, I feel fear. All my muscles stiffen," replied David. The pilot nodded sympathetically and took a course in the direction indicated by the businessman. The dashboard, arrows with various lights and sensors, and overhead the blades were noisily cutting through the air like a giant kitchen knife. I fixed my eyes on binoculars. David habitually marked the smallest details of the relief and admired the view of the river. Soon some village appeared ahead. David could not remember its exact name, but he was sure that it was somehow connected with the forest. "There's a wedding there, it looks like. You see, at home the tables are decorated with ribbons and tablecloths." The pilot was the first to notice the eyes. David looked in the direction indicated by the guy and saw a solemn procession with icons, a loaf with salt in the temple. Smiling, the man was about to give a sign to the pilot not to stay in this place for a long time. Suddenly, he saw something strange. The people standing below suddenly became visibly agitated and began to rush around the bride, who for some reason lay on the ground and clutched her stomach. David used the calculator of his binoculars and immediately realized what had caused the panic among the villagers. The bride was in labor. The businessman could clearly see her round belly through the binoculars. David felt ashamed, as if he was peeping at someone else's life through a keyhole. "It's getting cozy out there. Shall we do another lap, David?" the pilot asked. "No, landing the chopper. You can see the field over there. Perfect landing site. I'll go check it out. See if you need any help. I don't like this wedding. It's the first time I've ever seen it. Couldn't it have been played sooner or later? Why wait until the last minute?" The pilot reacted almost instantly and began a slow landing. The helicopter barely touched the ground in winter. David climbed out of the cockpit and hurried towards the crowd of people with their breasts and their bellies around the departing bride. "Look how the rich man came, like an archangel from heaven," one of the drunken men remarked. Letting the remark pass his ears, David came closer. "What's your problem? Maybe you need some help? We won't need anything. We'll manage on our own. What can you do for me?" "A businessman with a whiff of alcohol," said the groom. But when David looked into the bride's eyes, he immediately realized that things were much worse than he had imagined. They'd have to take the ear to the district center. "She says the fetus is lying wrong. And after the last rainstorm, the road was washed away and the bridge swayed. It's unreliable." Taking David by the hand, the old woman said, "So what's the matter?" "I can get her into town." "What's to think about? We'll find a place just right." "Come on, help me to the cabin," the man ordered. Soon the drowning bride was escorted to the helicopter, where the surprised pilot opened the door in front of her. Now, please bear with us. We will be quick, and you will not have time to look back," said David, who wanted to alleviate the suffering of the woman. She looked to be about 25 years old, not more, realizing that it was necessary to act quickly. In a matter of seconds, the pilot lifted the helicopters into the air and flew towards the district center, apparently out of fright and fear of flying. The labor contractions of the woman in labor subsided a little, although they didn't stop completely. "How did you get so lucky? A wedding and childbirth on the same day. What's your name, beautiful creature?" "Careful," David asked. The bride's eyes brimmed with tears. "Kristen, I didn't want to get married, you know. My mother made me. She said, 'Who needs you with a belly?' My first husband died, so I had to accept the offer of a local farmer. I have a 7-year-old son. Noah is mine." The woman's confession, to put it mildly, shocked David. Christina said that she would soon have 2 children fathered by an alcoholic farmer. At that moment, the helicopter was suddenly rocked by a gust of wind, but the pilot coped and began to descend, choosing a convenient place to land. David involuntarily shifted his gaze to Christina's hand, and his heart gave an agonizing spasm. On the bride's hand was the same gold ring he had given Betty 8 years ago. Where had she gotten that ring? Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I'm just being obvious. David's mind raced. Since there was no time to ask, the man decided to put this awkward conversation off until later. Having landed the helicopter, Jacob and David started to help the woman in labor, who was already being waited for by the ambulance crew, thoughtfully called by the pilot about 10 meters away. Everything happened so quickly that the paramedic thanked David for his participation. "Thank you. You helped a lot. The road to her new one was completely washed out. There's no way we could have gotten there. Of course, we could have involved the emergency services. But all the equipment is in short supply, especially now that the river's out of control. Yes, but I didn't do anything special. The main thing now is to give birth to a big baby." David waved it away. In fact, the thought of how Christina had gotten Betty's ring still didn't leave his mind. She didn't look like a thief, and she wouldn't sell memorabilia. The girl obviously wouldn't, although things happen in life. Back home, David didn't tell Adriana about the incident at the village wedding, and the spouse herself did not want to listen to his stories about the pleasant emotions received during the flight. The next day, David postponed all business and went to the maternity ward. But barely the businessman crossed the threshold as the duty nurse joyfully cried out, "Here comes the father. Congratulations on your daughter. 3,200. She looks just like her mother. A little princess, by God." David blushed to the roots of his hair and coughed embarrassedly. "I'm not really a father. I delivered her only yesterday by private helicopter, as it was quite difficult to surprise the nurse. She made a stalemate out of a stalemate. Well, just tell me. You're the baby's godfather now. So you're welcome. Put on your robe and come straight towards 6. Don't forget your shoe covers." David nodded and followed all the nurse's recommendations. Soon he was sitting opposite Christina, who was just feeding the baby. "Congratulations. I think you will be happy already." David started the daughter. What's in it for him? He's a heavy drinker. He hasn't even called. His mother says he hasn't woken up since last night. David nodded. Then he gathered his courage and asked the question that had been bothering him all this time. "Christina, I'm sorry, of course, but where did you get that ring?" "The one with the monogram on the back with the letter on it." "Oh, is that right?" "That's right." "Where did you come from?" You moved your chair closer." "I know it, because I personally gave it to my favorite girl, Betty. We broke up afterward, but that's not important anymore. However, I don't think she would sell that ring." Christina turned pale and, putting the baby on her other side, replied, "And she didn't sell it. She gave it to her before she died." How did David get so excited? "Just like that. She was pregnant with you." "I met Betty at a coffee shop. We were waiters there. 2 idiots from the provinces who came to the regional center. We shared a room at first until Betty had a baby, and I didn't get a fiancé. What happened then? Why didn't she tell me about her son? Couldn't she have done something about it?" David couldn't help himself. "Why didn't she? She also told me how she wrote all the letters to you. I didn't know your number because I sold my phone to pay the rent. 8 months ago, when she was Noah, she died with my fiancé. I was on shift at the time, and they went to the market to buy Christmas presents for the holiday. They got into an accident, and I was supposed to ride with John. Yeah, but my partner got sick, so I took her place. My fiancé died right away. Betty was still conscious for a couple hours. So she asked me to foster a cat, and she gave me her ring." David's face turned white as chalk, and his lips trembled. "But why didn't you find me? Why didn't you tell me about your son? You didn't ask for help." Christina shook her head. Tears were running down her cheeks. "I'm not going to look for you. She didn't have time to tell me your last name. And David, in the neighborhood there's a pond. You know, I had my share of children too. Only later I found out that John had died. I went back to the village the third week. And then my mother and stepfather got mad. Why, they say, shame on you. You brought an adopted child, and you're telling lies yourself. You so easily agreed to marry this alcoholic. David exclaimed excitedly. No, of course not. My stepfather got into big debts large tractor owners foolishly jeopardized, and the equipment is foreign. There, the farmer said, one day my stepdaughter's debt will be forgiven. So I had no choice. Though I went into labor just in time. We never got married, so that drunkard will be left with his nose. David listened to Christina and couldn't move. Her story seemed so incredible that the man's head was spinning. It had been only 8 years, and he already had a son, Noah, who considered his mother to be a friend of the late Betty. Although he still remembers his real mom, he's just coming to terms with the loss. I guess David thought, and then added out loud, don't worry about a thing. You don't have to go back to the village. I'll pick up Noah and bring him back to my house. Christina froze fearfully, but she couldn't ask the man about his current wife. But David began by talking to Adriana, who confessed almost immediately that she had been burning letters from Betty for months. Go away so my eyes don't see you. I'm filing for divorce. And I have a son. He's 8 years old. Frustrated, Adriana headed for the door. Frankly speaking, in this case, she already had an insurance option in the person of the banker's widow, who was addicted to smarmy, cute female faces. But the main surprise was waiting for Noah, for whom came by helicopter, not a kind wizard, but his own father, whose capabilities were much more fabulous. After explaining the situation to Christina's mom, David paid off her stepfather's debt. He also left money to replace the gate and fences. Dad, we're going to pick up Christina's mom from the maternity hospital, too. Watch out, asked Noah. Of course we are, but not by helicopter, but by car, with a bouquet of chocolates and champagne. David replied cheerfully. At that moment, the businessman caught himself thinking that the nurse from the maternity ward was looking at water when she called in the new father of the baby. If you like the story, I hope for your support, with a thumbs up button for you one click. But for me, that's the best kind of gratitude. Good health to you and all the best.